This is the hardest video I've ever had to make. I never thought I'd have to make a video like this, but it has come to my attention that I have failed men. For those not familiar, men are like, how do I describe them? They're like normal people, but usually they're bigger, and usually they're hairier, and they don't typically smell as good. It's hard to describe them because they're quite variable. Some of them are Chinese, some of them are dentists. They're all different. You know one when you see one. But it's not important what men are. What's important is that it's been brought to my attention that some of my words have been deeply offensive to men and people within the larger male fandom. And that was never my intention. I would never want to mock people who I think could defeat me in a fight. Besides, some of my best friends are men. I have men in my family. I'm even half man on my father's side. I have a deep and abiding respect for men and male culture. I've participated in many of their rituals, gone to their places of worship, ate their traditional foods. I will now give the traditional male apology for any offense my thoughtless words may have caused. I'm sorry, bro. I love you, bro. We good, bro? Now to back up and explain myself a little bit, in a video about the deeply embarrassing Nick Adams and the deeply embarrassing way he tries to portray himself as an alpha male by, stepping on candies and going to boob restaurants.
Until M&Ms rectify this grave wrong by giving us all male M&Ms, this boycott will remain. M&Ms?
Put down the woke M&Ms.
I said the following. The question of whether or not the hashtag online left does enough to appeal to hashtag men has become the question du jour. And that's a very misguided question, in my opinion. Broadly speaking, the goal of the left should be to spread power to the most people possible. And so it should always be kind of harder to get people who already have unfair amounts of power on board. That's inconvenient, but it's also kind of unavoidable without diluting the goals we seek to achieve. It is never in the self-interest of the powerful to aid the powerless. That's the reason there are powerful and powerless people in the first place. And men, by and large, are more powerful than women. There are, of course, exceptions. There are intersections of other forms of oppression that can make individual people's stories different than the general trend. But men have most of the money, authority, and do most of the murdering and assaulting, often to not men. In virtually any circumstance where a man has a shitty time in life, if that man were a woman, they would be having a worse time, because they'd have all of their regular problems plus some new woman problems. I can see now the mistake I made, which is that I took it for granted that my words would be understood in the context I said them in, rather than used outside of that context to give the illusion I had said something different than what I said. And for that, I apologize. Never in a million years would I have thought that simply saying the most banal, obvious, and self-evident facts about the reproduction of patriarchy could be taken as evidence of a supposed demonization of men and manhood. Particularly because the whole fucking video, the whole fucking thing, was about how insincere this type of performative masculinity is, how it does not represent men realistically, and holds them to standards that are both impossible and, this is important, deeply stupid. But then, some very concerned people reached out with some gentle criticism, some suggestions that I should kill myself, more people than the normal amount that tell me to kill myself, and a lot of people complaining that I hate men and also for some reason white people, which I don't feel is related, but okay, I'll work on that too, I guess. And I didn't want to admit it at the time. I thought, what's probably happened here is that some chud must have talked about me in a video, some chud didn't like a thing I said and they showed it to their chud audience to get them mad at me about it. But what happened next shook me to my core. Because it turns out it wasn't a chud that talked about me in a video. It was Shoeonhead. What? Well, she didn't really talk about me so much as she showed a clip of me in passing in a video. And that was why suddenly my feed sucked more for a little while until they got bored. And it confused me. It confused my delicate little brain.
Huh?
I would understand if some chud made a video about me, but Shoeonhead is, of course, no right-wing culture warrior. Now, I'll grant you, she once was. She was once an anti-feminist crusader in the meme wars. She rubbed shoulders and hobnobbed with all sorts of anti-SJW alt-right adjacent figureheads and white supremacist terrorists back then. But in time, the scales fell from her eyes like Paul on the road to Damascus. And now she's a bona fide, real, honest-to-God, no-foolin' leftist. She said so. Of course, those old videos are still there. She's not running from her past. And of course, they're still monetized. She's still benefiting from her past. But when people come to our side, it's cause for celebration. They should be welcomed and given leadership positions. That's called solidarity. People can change. People can change without meaningfully changing their behavior. And at the time, I was too busy to respond because, of course, I was working on a video about fake leftists disingenuously calling for left unity in order to use our spaces to spread their right-leaning, often bigoted ideas. So, of course, you see, I had no time to think about Shoeonhead. No, I'm doing it again. I'm being snide. I mustn't be snide. Being snide is what got me into this mess. Look, I can't see inside Shoeonhead's heart. If I were forced to guess, I'd imagine her conversion, so to speak, is genuine. I don't think she's lying about that, and I don't really give a shit if she is, and I don't think it would matter if she was. For the record, I find it far more likely that she did genuinely change her mind about some things, but also held on to a lot of her previous biases without realizing it. I think she's coming from a background of like latent right-wing echo chambery spaces, and she still has a lot of those ideas bouncing around in her brain. It's not that she like sat down and like deliberately, maliciously said, good, I will infiltrate the leftists by pretending to be one of them. That's a cartoon thing to do. She didn't do that. Sometimes leftists are shitheads. I don't know what to tell you. She would say I'm a shithead. I would think that wouldn't cause her to think I am like a fake leftist any more so than like a lot of people do. Now, she doesn't really so much talk about me in her video. She includes like 2 seconds of me talking, although within those 2 seconds, she does do some, let's call it creative editing.
Why would a struggling man even want to move left when the left appears actively hostile to them?
The question of whether or not the hashtag online left does enough to appeal to hashtag men has become the question du jour. And like, men have most of the money, authority, and do most of the murdering and assaulting.
The average young man in America isn't Jeff Bezos. Also, why did this motherfucker just FBI crime statistics at me? Men do the most murder. Okay?
Sorry, Shu, I should have been clearer about this. I was talking about who has power over who in the scenario. You probably didn't realize that because it was in the part of the video that you skipped, but generally, when you're willing to kill someone, that grants you a certain power over them. Kind of thought that didn't need clarifying, but there you go. That's why I threw that statistic in there. They like having all of the stuff they don't deserve. They like that. They want it to stay that way because it suits them. Because of the stuff, telling people they're special and deserve all the nice shit that they have, that's going to be an easier sell 10 times out of 10 than like saying, hey, maybe you should have less stuff and other people should have more.
Leftism is when you don't have a lot of stuff.
No, I don't think leftism is about having less stuff. I do think it is about flattening unjust power dynamics and kind of dismantling oppressive power structures. And so if one group is systematically denied stuff, then yeah, taking stuff from the people denying it and giving it to them is indeed leftist. Kind of thought that went without saying, kind of thought that was self-evident. If one were to simply watch her video, which approximately 3 million people did, they'd get the impression that I was saying that the left should not do outreach to men because men are murderers and evil, when in fact, what I actually said was the left, by virtue of the positions we hold, will always have a harder time converting those who benefit from the structures we seek to dismantle, a position she herself states in the same video.
But the fact is, it's hard for progressives to organically appeal to men, because a large part of progressivism is oppressive hierarchies, and men are oppressors. Making progressivism look appealing to young men is an uphill battle from the start.
And thus, the question of whether or not the left does enough to appeal to men is misguided. It's harder for the left to do that, kind of intrinsically. My point about men doing most of the murdering and assaulting, which is just a statistical reality, was not brought up, as Shu presents it here, as evidence that the left need not appeal to men. I brought it up many sentences later to demonstrate the relative power dynamics between men and not men. But she kind of just splices those two things together, and it gives the impression I'm simply dismissing men's concerns out of pocket. She hilariously had to skip past a part where I specifically say that there are, of course, exceptions to the general rule that men are more privileged than, say, women. Because if she didn't, it would become clear that her entire framing of this issue is kind of horseshit. Because of course men have mental health problems, and of course those mental health problems are important and worth taking seriously. The only people she seems to be able to point to say otherwise is like weird Twitter randos. Given that she likes to, let's say, embellish the contents of some people's tweets, I don't find that argument necessarily persuasive. Saying that someone has privilege, or even indeed that they actively enforce a structure which privileges them, doesn't mean that, we ought to never ever listen to them or help them with anything ever. If I were on fire, I would expect a less privileged person who is holding a fire extinguisher to help me. She also seems to be missing the broader critique people are making. I think that she's absolutely right, for example, to point out that it's kind of rude and shitty to respond to a man having a mental health crisis by simply saying that mental health crisis is the result of patriarchy. I don't think it's fair to lay patriarchy at the feet of an individual man, and I don't think it's helpful to dismiss someone's mental health concerns on the basis of their own relative privilege, or even their shitty attitude about it or whatever. Even if someone is a sexist jerk, their mental health problems are important. Mental health does not discriminate in this way. Even mean, shitty people deserve to have their mental health treated and taken seriously. That being said, it does kind of seem to me like Shu is suggesting that discussions of patriarchy and privilege are the thing which makes men depressed and lonely, or at the very least, the thing which prevents feminists and leftists from addressing the issue, that men feel undervalued and attacked specifically because of efforts to dismantle these privileges. Towards the end of her video, for example, she says that men are natural providers and that their inability to provide makes them feel valueless.
A lot of men's value comes from the money they make, unfortunately. Men are natural providers, and if they have nobody to provide for, they get into findom or send random girls on the internet money. I'm just kidding, but the fact is, a lot of men simply feel like they don't have a purpose anymore. Whether a job or a career that's fulfilling and pays well, or a woman or family to protect and take care of and provide for.
And it does strike me as disingenuous to at once say that men feel undervalued because they're unable to be providers, which is obviously true and a serious problem, and then go on to say that men are natural providers, a phrase which insists that men are correct, that their value is based on how well they provide for others. It suggests that if a man's partner or family does not require him to provide for them, they are somehow robbing him of his natural position. This is, in my view, rather ironically, precisely the type of gender essentialism that creates the loneliness and depression she is ostensibly so concerned with. The idea of men just being naturally the providers is the justifying logic of patriarchy. Of course, it's not that non-men have been forbidden from or kept out of positions where they could provide for themselves. It's simply that men are, by nature of being men, naturally seeking out those positions and do them better because of their natural provider vibes. You see this logic applied each and every time some dickhead claims the wage gap doesn't exist and that women simply choose jobs which pay less. No thought is given as to why women choose those positions or why those positions are paid less. That's just what women do naturally because of their girl brains, which naturally don't want as much money as men. It's kind of silly, right? Because of course there's no biological drive within men that makes them need to provide. It's the result of patriarchal conditioning, the justifying logic of patriarchy, of maintaining male privilege, backfiring and making men sad because the thing it is justifying actually sucks. It sucks for everybody. So the solution to that problem is to undo that conditioning, to help them understand that others are their equal and thus equally capable of providing for themselves. It does not make them weak or useless if their loved ones don't depend on them for survival. They need not be the breadwinner. They are valuable and worthy of love either way, as indeed all people are. If the boys need to provide to be happy, fulfilled, and mentally healthy individuals, if that is just a natural, normal part of being a man, something they can't change, and our goal is to prevent them from feeling those feelings, that would seem to suggest that men should at least be financially privileged, so that they get to be the providers, that we shouldn't meddle in that natural, normal state of affairs. Now, yeehaw, hold up there, partners. I'm not trying to present that as Shu's opinion. I don't think it is. I doubt very much she would say that that is what she believes consciously. I don't want to present those as her words, nor would I sink so low as to edit two sentences she said together to make them appear to be her words. They are not. She is not saying that. It would be a lie if I said that she was saying that. But it is the unavoidable extrapolation from what she is saying, leaving me with the question, does she kind of believe that on some level? Or did she simply not realize that implication? And in either case, it speaks to what I think is a blind spot in her reasoning. She seems to consistently frame the feelings of men as taking priority over the needs of others. She lists examples of women's victories in the workplace or university and kind of just baselessly speculates that this is the reason men are getting more depressed.
Men have been dropping out of college like flies. And what does that get you? Poor men. Which, since women are doing amazing in college now, and many are now out-earning men, this most of the time leads to single men, which then leads to lonely men, which leads to depressed men, which leads to the high suicide rate.
Okay, let's think that through for a minute. If that is the case, what are women to do about it? Simply forego their own ambitions, careers, and educations because pursuing them might make the fellas sad? We're meant to accept that men become sad when they have fewer options, but would not other people as well? Would not women become sad if they cannot have job? And just spitballing here, while we're throwing out ideas, maybe those men could still date women that make more money than them. Unless somehow they came to the conclusion that in order to be a good partner and desirable as a man, they would need to be the natural provider unless that were the case. Of course, it's not that I think Shus believes men's feelings should take first priority. That would be a ridiculous thing for her, a woman, to believe. It's just that I think her sympathies are more in line with anti-feminist positions than one might expect. And she's not doing that in like an insidious way. You know, it's just that she was an anti-feminist for a long time. She is obviously sympathetic to their reasoning and has cultivated a following of people who are also very sympathetic to that reasoning. You can see that, for example, when she brings up women being more likely to go to post-secondary education, as though that implies men are, if anything, actually economically disadvantaged, that we have overcorrected, and now men are the ones being held back. But like, those figures change a lot when you compare graduation rates for fields that are more likely to make lots and lots of money. At one point, she talks about how the Tumblr feminists she was mocking back in the day are now transphobes, and thus, we all should have cut her some slack back then.
90% of all homicides recorded worldwide were committed by male perpetrators. We should just get rid of all males, to be honest. This includes trans women, as they still retain male violence. By the way, you know the Tumblr feminists who were like, all men are sexist and rapists, male tears, penises are evil, blah 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 back in the day? Well, this is them now. Should've just let me cook back then.
I think there are a few problems with what she's saying here. I think that there are, for example, a lot of valid criticisms of Tumblr-style pop feminism, and I think chief among those criticisms is a culture of toxic performative inclusion, where people climb over one another to tick more diversity boxes rather than meaningfully examine the power dynamics between different types of people in any sincere way. And of course, no doubt some Tumblr-style hyper-online feminist keyboard warriors have grown turfy in old age, but that isn't a criticism, I think, that necessarily applies to that style of pop feminism. At worst, I guess you could say that it's vulnerable to entryism from turf lords, but that seems much more common among the type of people Shus was pals with at that time. Nor do I think she was fighting with them on that basis, nor do I think anyone who criticized her prior anti-feminist position would have been mad at her if she had been, nor does her allegiance to trans rights seem all that ironclad, seeing as how she later goes on to claim that within leftist spaces, trans men are somehow less discriminated against than cis men.
Misandry is real. Oh good, finally! And while it doesn't systemically affect cis men, it most certainly affects trans men. Oh. Y'all talking about misandry doesn't harm men, and trans men are right there reading this shit, by the way. I see, now we only care about misandry because it affects trans men. Everyone stop! It's affecting a group I care about now.
Oh, for sure, if there's one group that I think gets no benefit of the doubt, it's cis men. And trans people famously always given the benefit of the doubt. That makes a lot of sense. You're a serious person. Miss Shoeonhead, you are confused, I think. When people say misandry doesn't exist, they don't mean it like you think they mean it. Because of course it's possible for people to not like men or to speak ill of them or to individually have prejudices against them. That's common sense. When people say that misandry doesn't exist, they mean it more in the sense that it doesn't exist as a systemic oppressive force in the same way that misogyny does. That any systemic problems men might face are better understood as a product of the maintenance of patriarchy than a willful effort to oppress men and privilege women. People are quick to distinguish between cis men and trans men about this because the world treats those two groups quite differently. People often impose restrictions and oppression on trans men in a way they do not on cis men, and thus, it is necessary to point out the distinction. Ben Affleck is history's most sad man. Nobody bats an eye. Elliot Page doesn't smile for like 2 seconds in an interview. Obviously, transitioning has robbed him of all joy.
I feel joy.
I feel
hanging
joy.
with my dog, going on walks.
So much joy.
Getting down.
Does it look like this person experiences any kind of joy?
Do you see the difference?
Studies have shown that men are scared to be vulnerable, even around the homies. And can you blame them when the media says stupid like this? Fellas, is it woke to open up to your fellow men and discuss history? Men are socialized to believe strength, dominance, and stoicism are behaviors of a real man. Is it any surprise that men are lonely and have less friends nowadays?
The video she pulled the clip of me talking from, by the way, is actually about this distinction. The difference between toxic masculinity and just guys being dudes. It's a video all about how meat-headed Dumbo fake masculinity makes men lonely and miserable. That guys like Nick Adams who pose outdated gender essentialist stereotypes on men are, in my opinion, the primary drivers of the male loneliness epidemic she is criticizing here. Hey, have you ever noticed that the version of masculinity that guys like Adams promote is fucking miserable? That all of the little weirdos, Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, the fresh and fit ghouls, they all propose this type of manhood that is just completely joyless and empty, where bonds between people are impossible, and the only way two human beings can relate to one another is through the veiled or not so veiled threat of violence. The idea that men must be strong at all times and never show their feelings, that's gonna make them crack, because people can't do that. It seems pretty obvious to me that men have feelings, and I think therefore should let those feelings be expressed. So fellas, how you feeling? Comment below. She argues, however, that toxic masculinity has been around forever, and if anything, nowadays, it's more accepted for men to talk about their feelings, so they should be feeling pretty tight actually.
Men have been socialized this way for centuries, and this is all relatively a new phenomena. Toxic masculinity has existed forever. If anything, there's less toxic masculinity nowadays. The cultural embrace of like gender nonconformity, femboys, Harry Styles in a dress, Barbie movie, blah 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 blah. My point is, toxic masculinity did not just appear in the mid-2010s.
I genuinely have no idea what she thinks toxic masculinity is here. She seems to understand it primarily as like needing to present traditionally masculine, which is certainly part of it, I suppose. But, you know, there's still the whole men being socialized not to talk about their feelings thing you literally just talked about. Like you literally just talked about. Feels like it's still a pretty big problem, actually, based on the thing you just said. She instead places the blame partially on economic anxiety, which, yeah, I would agree with to an extent.
The housing crisis and living in a country where the wealth inequality is worse than it was during the Gilded Age. That all happened recently.
And the rise of social media and internet pornography, which is...
But social media did, and the internet did, and the rise of dating apps did. A lot of people, including myself, blame this partially on the rise of social media and technology. RIP to the king. Although technology makes things easier, it can also make us more atomized. Why go to the mall when I can just tap, buy a new microphone, and have it shipped to me in a day? Why hang out with friends when I can get all my social interaction I need from Twitter and streamers? Why go on dates and bother meeting women when I could just tap, Google big boob and get 2 million results? Or see my high school crush's holes on OnlyFans for only $5. Instant dopamine, instant satisfaction, and hey, who even needs a real woman when you could just have an AI girlfriend? We're f***ed. We're so f***ed.
Okay. So a couple problems. I have it on good authority that there are people on social media and indeed within the economy who are not men. So why then would the rise of social media make men specifically more unhappy? Why would economic anxieties primarily affect men? Why is it, do you think, internet pornography is so bad for men when various non-men are perfectly capable of becoming horny? Don't believe me? Turn off Safe Search and Google Spiderpunk. Seems like if that was the explanation, everyone would be getting sadder because everyone is equally exposed to these things. And since it seems to be the case that this would affect everyone, and in case you want to dispute that, here's you saying it.
A few new studies have come out that have shown that young men are more lonely and single than ever before. But it's not just men. The women and children, too. It's predicted 45% of women will be single and childless by 2030. But according to the media, this is a good thing. The she-economy is booming, as they say.
Wouldn't framing this as a men's issue, which we need to look after men's concerns in order to correct, kind of imply that men's mental health takes priority over that of others? Shu attempts to make the case that the reason the right is more successful at courting young boys... Yeah, that's how I'm going to phrase it. is that the left doesn't even talk to them. We just sit in our ivory tower and we don't care, and we just say, it's not my job to educate you, and we sip our soy lattes and invent new pronouns to call each other. Now listen, I will never try to make the argument that leftists are not annoying. If your point was simply that leftists should be less annoying, I would open my heart to your words. You would be speaking directly to my soul. But to suggest that any leftist anywhere on earth would give up the opportunity to talk for a long period of time at anyone who might theoretically listen? Ludicrous, fanciful, wishful thinking. I think Shu is once again just taking the right's framing of this for granted. That the right are the only ones taking men's concerns seriously and treating them like human beings. To wit, a bunch of mean tweets from leftists. Leftists make mean tweets about men, so obviously they don't know any or talk to any. And if one can't be reasonable on Twitter, a place famous for level-headed, even-keeled discussion, then surely they have abandoned the male race. Unlike the right, who is famously polite on Twitter and always work hard to take men's mental health very seriously and reach out gently with a sympathetic ear. Kindness, compassion, understanding, these are the watchwords of right-wing Twitter. She gives, as a case study of this phenomenon, a young Mr. Andrew Tate, and presents his explosion in popularity as a sort of organic consequence of the left abandoning men to the mercy of the right. Guys like Tate and Peterson, she claims, rose to power simply because men yearned for genuine mental health advice and the left was simply too uncaring to offer it to them, instead choosing to vilify them as toxic and privileged and to repeatedly insist they do not commit sexual assault.
The reason young men flock to alt-right MRA movements is because the left gives brain-dead advice to young men. I'm sorry, but how is respect women brain-dead advice? What advice? Don't rape? Don't be a rapist is bad advice? Help, I have no friends or community, I feel suicidal. Have you considered not raping?
So she makes a lot of hay of this, and she is, of course, correct in pointing out that it won't help any man's individual mental health to hear that. But also, it seems really weird to suggest, some might say dishonest to suggest, that that was the point anyone was making. Because really, it seems pretty clear that the tweets she was showing weren't suggesting men are depressed and lonely because they are rapists, and that the left advises them to knock that off. But rather that guys like this are giving bad advice which encourages men to behave rapefully. Like, a lot of their advice boils down to disregard people's boundaries, and that's kind of a fucked up thing to teach people, I think, is the point everyone was making with this glib remark. It does not seem as though they were genuinely offering do not rape as mental health advice. I don't think it was her intention to be sympathetic to Peterson or Tate. She is, after all, making this video, partially at least, to talk about how harmful they specifically are, and how the left, in her view, is ill-equipped to confront them. She nonetheless seems to share their view of themselves and their role in the discourse and how they became popular. She says, for example, that Tate seldom talks about politics. He just talks about men.
Andrew Tate rarely, if ever, talks about politics. Andrew Tate talks about men, and the left only talks about men when they talk about Andrew Tate.
I don't really know what that means. Like, I guess Tate doesn't talk about electoral politics very often. He does sometimes, but not as often as other stuff. But like, discussing men and the way that men ought to behave and how the world ought to treat men or anyone else and the various power dynamics between those groups, that is political. If we divorce these men from their own myth-making, the circumstances of their respective rises to popularity are quite different than Shu has presented them here. Jordan Peterson first grew to popularity by lying about Bill C-16, a needlessly controversial amendment to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which extended existing protections against discrimination to include discrimination against gender identity. He rode the popularity wave of transphobic hate speech and parlayed that into a career as a public intellectual and parlayed that into a self-help grift. He didn't simply get popular out of nowhere because men yearned for his sage advice. Andrew Tate became popular on social media by having the men in his self-help groups receive discounts if they flooded social media with posts about how cool and or sick he is. It wasn't simply an effect of his natural charisma.
Sparkling water you have to buy. So if you only drink sparkling water, you only drink rich man's water. You ever meet a man who's afraid of sparkling water, know this: he's certainly afraid of combat.
Or a world that was yearning for someone like him. It was a deliberate and clever, albeit highly unethical media strategy that paid off. Something he was able to pursue because he was already a very successful sex trafficker. Both of these guys have an easy time winning the allegiance of young boys and depressed, desperate men because they're willing to lie. They don't actually care about the well-being of these men and boys. They'll just say whatever makes them a quick buck, even if what they're saying hurts those men and boys. They'll just sell them whatever easy answers they already want to hear. That's why their audiences are full of either very young people who lack adult critical thinking skills or vulnerable people who are more easily subject to that type of emotional manipulation. They have no problem claiming that, if you do as they say, all your problems will just be solved forever on their own. You'll stop being depressed, you'll make more money, you'll get strong, you will receive mad puss. It's not that, like, leftists just never thought of offering advice to men. It's that this is not a strategy that the left could or should emulate. Because, like, our goal, I hope, is not simply to trick people for easy money. We can't just lie to them. We can't ignore their safety or best interests in service of getting them to do what we want. We can't say, for example, that if they become intersectional feminists and study bell hooks, they'll get mad puss. I don't think it would hurt, but why would it help? I don't think it would do that. It's certainly not a guarantee. I think we can agree on that much. There are a lot of factors which determine whether or not you get mad puss. Perhaps take some time to examine why it is you feel entitled to mad puss in the first place. And for that matter, whether you are seeking mad puss simply as a means of projecting a sort of misguided social capital. After you've done that work, also try learning guitar. I don't know, maybe that'd help. Beyond even that, once again, as I said in the video she misquoted me from, it is just more difficult to get a privileged group on the side of eliminating said privilege because, you know, they benefit from it. It privileges them, one might say. That is what privilege is. It's the only way that privilege can exist, because otherwise, if no one had an interest in maintaining it, it would just evaporate. It would go away on its own. That does not require, of course, that the privileged group is consciously, willfully suppressing those they have privilege over, though sometimes they might be, or that they're necessarily deliberately malicious in some way, though sometimes they might be. Men aren't privileged because they sit around scheming about how to oppress other people, obviously. I think it goes without saying that most men, given the choice, would prefer that all people are treated equally. I think that is the normal thing that pretty much everyone wants. But it's just self-evidently more difficult to get people who benefit from inequality on board with the project of equality. All things being equal, people like to have benefits. Why else would most feminist icons be women? Why else would most civil rights icons be black? This isn't difficult stuff. This isn't complex theory. It's common sense, and here's you saying it.
Men flock to the MRA movement because they're the largest beneficiaries of MRA shit. Imagine saying women flock to women's rights activism because they're the biggest beneficiaries of women's rights. Like, no f***ing shit.
I actually think they harm men quite a bit, but, you know, you were responding to someone who phrased it as though they help men, so I guess I'll give you a pass on that one. Still, maybe that's something you might have wanted to clarify. I would have thought, at least, that it wasn't controversial to say that we need not try to court or appeal to people whose goals and beliefs are directly contrary to our own. Like, we obviously cannot convince everyone. People who explicitly reject our goals should not be welcome within our movement. We either get those people on board with our goals, or we tell them to fuck clean off. And we're never gonna get everyone on board. Some people need to be told to fuck clean off. The goals are the whole thing the movement is for. There's no sense building a big movement if that movement doesn't have a goal in line with what we want. Perhaps our energy is better spent making the rejection of our goals politically costly than just banging our heads against the wall trying fruitlessly to convert people whose material interests motivate them to oppose us. It seems like an effective strategy because each time one of these costs is extracted, the right piss and shit their diaper about how unfair and scary it is. They seem to dislike this strategy quite a bit, which suggests to me that it is working. Of course, they'll always say it doesn't. And if your audience is full of people with that kind of sympathy, you might come to believe that it doesn't work because the people who don't want us to do it are telling you that. When I talk about people who oppose our goals, I don't mean men as a category of person, because men are, give or take, roughly half the population. It would be disastrously unwise to simply abandon half of the population. I do not think men, as a general rule, are evil or unreachable, or that the left should simply not try to get men on board or accept that sexist men can never have their minds changed. That's maybe something I should have specified in the video, because a lot of people seem to think, or were motivated to pretend, I was saying that we should never try to get men on board with us. So I should have made that clear. Oh, hey, wait a minute. Wait just 1 minute. I just looked on https://YOUTU.BE/GFL4SE4PZWG?SI=YGLWPKRQF4GO-GN9 and T=889, and I did. I did do that mere seconds after the clip Shu used in her video. We have to be okay with alienating certain groups of people. Just pausing here because I don't think I did a great job of clarifying this point. I am not saying that dudes are unreachable. I'm saying that there are a portion of dudes who are unreachable. They're a small minority. That's so fucking weird. Because from the way that people are talking to me, from the way that people are responding to what I said, it's as though I didn't say that. And what's up with that, everybody? It's kind of like my words were taken out of a larger word zone. I don't know if there's a term for that, but like, do you see my point here? Because our position is basically, hey there, fellas, you should join us, because here's why. It's the right thing to do, and while you obviously benefit enormously from the structure as it is that we're attempting to dismantle, people other than you will suffer, so please accept this enormous moral burden for the rest of your life. While the right-wing position is basically, hey, fellas, you know those people you want to control? Well, they should be your slaves, and they should cook and clean and fuck you whenever you want, because you're cooler and smarter than them, basically. You're really special and you deserve that. And if any of that makes you feel bad, like it makes you feel like you have some empathy for them, just know that God said so, and God is the moral arbiter of the universe, so it's okay to think this. It's normal and natural. Do you see how the bad position is kind of an easier sell? How that's a clearer value proposition? How the left is kind of fighting an uphill battle, and to suggest that it's simply a lack of effort on our part is kind of willfully disastrously ignorant, how our methods are not so easily disentangled from our goals, and to suggest that we emulate the methods of our opponents could have the unintended consequence of undermining those goals? Now, none of this should be controversial. I would call it Feminism 101, but it's not even that, really. These are the starting positions that everyone should be able to agree on, that a feminist might use to construct a Feminism 101 argument. Even the most ardent anti-feminist should be able to admit that if male privilege exists, whether or not they concede that it does, some men would want it. Far be it from me to suggest that she in any way read my video in bad faith, because I really don't think she watched it. She probably just watched the video she linked in her description of Vosh, who did read it in bad faith, and she got mad at that. It was just, more helpful to both of their positions to pretend to believe that I am saying that all men are bad and evil, and decide to do harm to not men on purpose because of their bad, evil nature. That men deserve to be lonely and non-men should isolate themselves from men who are too dangerous to be trusted, which is a weird thing to think that I would advocate for, because while I don't consider myself a man, strictly speaking, I am typically perceived as one. I piss amongst the menfolk, and nobody finds that unusual or strange. I have, within my possession, an entire penis and testicles. Many people, superstitiously, would argue that that alone makes me intrinsically and irrevocably male. So do you see how that line of argumentation could kind of backfire on me? Do you see why it would be disastrously unwise for me to stand in front of 300,000 people and say, hey everybody, you know that group that you think I'm part of, that I can never leave? They're evil and they want to kill you and you should stay away from them. They cannot be reached or changed. Do not trust them. It is not worth our time or effort to try. That could kind of backfire on me, don't you think? This should be obvious if one applies even the most basic standard of critical thinking, instead of trying to imagine I said whatever makes your audience most mad. And I'm being very critical of Shu here, but let's give the devil her due. I think she likely does genuinely care about men's mental health issues. I think she has enough compassion to see people suffering and to be moved by it. Let us now observe Shu's compassion for men.
Nobody told me how lonely being a man is. We knew what depth felt like before we transitioned. We knew what it felt like to have people want to hug us and to have people want to talk to us and to have a community. And then you transition and you're just a guy walking down the street that people cross the street so that they're not near you. None of this invalidates how real and raw women and people who are in marginalized groups feel about cis white men.
I love how even when he's experiencing the issues of being a man, he's like, this doesn't invalidate people hating men. Come on, bro.
Did he say it's okay to hate men? Did he say that? Because it sounded like he said a different thing, and you just kind of vilified a man having a mental health breakdown. That's the type of thing one might not do if they cared about men's mental health.
Listen up, chuckle. I'm white, socially awkward, autistic, in my 40s, ugly, overweight, crippled, got a weird balding pattern, and have bad skin. You know what I didn't do? Choose to become a fascist. I may be hideously ugly and pathetic, but at least I'm not a fascist. Thank you for your input, buddy. You're, really help in this situation.
Oh, I don't know, maybe this is just me, but I do feel like if someone is talking about all of the problems they have with their appearance, that is a sign that they are perhaps not emotionally healthy. And to laugh at them and call them hideous and pathetic could be perceived as one not caring about that person's mental health. And it makes her mad when she thinks she sees people snidely dismissing that suffering. And it also makes her mad to see me at all, so she would like very much to pretend that is what I did. But no, I was actually not snidely dismissing their suffering. I was snidely supporting their suffering. And I'm not like mad that she used a clip of me that made me look bad, because that would make me a huge hypocrite. I make myself look bad all the time. It's fun to do. I get that. I just think that her analysis of this subject is dangerously myopic, that she's really applying a bad faith lens to any and all feminist analysis, no matter how basic. She doesn't seem willing to consider the greater context that any of these issues exist within. And she seems to give a lot more weight and consideration to anti-feminist arguments than I think is helpful in this discussion. But that doesn't mean we have to behave in the same way. We don't need to miss her larger point either, because she is correct, of course, that there is a mental health crisis, and it does affect men, that men kill themselves at alarming rates, that men feel despondent and hopeless and lonely, and it behooves us all to try and be as compassionate as we can in dealing with that. But, let's be careful who we blame that problem on, because it's not that the left isn't trying, it's that the right is able to manipulate people, and we're trying not to do that. And that puts us inherently at a disadvantage. And the worst thing we could do right now is try to adopt similar tactics, because that would be abandoning men. That would be not taking their concerns or well-being seriously. Instead, I think the basic common sense solution to all of these problems is a sort of mandatory feminization of all cis men. We will sweep across the globe like a horde of estrogen locusts and destroy the entire concept of maleness and masculinity. We'll dye the oceans pink. We're going to remake Breaking Bad with an all-female cast. We're going to put tampons on the New World Order flag. Hello and welcome to the Yball Chromo Zone, the only Eldritch Horror YouTube promotional segment exclusively for boys. That's not to say that we exclusively feature men, or that we exclusively benefit men, because we don't really benefit anybody. All fall before the unspeakable might of the Yball. But I mean a secret third thing. Also, probably I should mention Eyeballs on small creators. I promote other people's work. That's the idea. I don't know if I've ever actually explained that out loud in the, holy shit, 4 years I've been doing this. Okay, all right, that's cool. Hey, kind of a weird, some might say, derelict of duty choice to make a video about some personal beef nobody cares about in the middle of an ongoing genocide. And yeah, I don't know what to tell you. Sometimes you're knee-deep in a project when the world just goes absolutely maniacal. And I'm not really sure how useful my voice on the subject might be, given my own, let's call it, tendency to default to histrionics and my personal feelings on the subject. Luckily, there are other, more responsible YouTubers to pick up my slack. In Debunking Israeli Ads, The Dark History of War Propaganda, Bridgette Empire outlines not only the utterly vile tactics that Zionist propagandists are using to dehumanize Palestinians right now, but goes in depth to demonstrate the lineage of these tactics within other modern genocides. And if you think any of the words I just said have lacked nuance, then please watch this video and get back to me. Also, consider going to fuck yourself. That right there, that's what I'm talking about. You're just looking for somewhere to throw some cash? Check out the organization's Medical Aid for Palestinians or the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, both linked below. And hey, now that we've talked about, some of the darkest shit in the world, let's have a jarring tonal shift. Hello and welcome to the Son of the Yball Zone. Here in the Son of the Yball Zone, we promote, still small creators, but usually they're my pals, for nepotism. Hey, remember earlier in this video when I said some of my best friends are men? That was no mere empty boast. In fact, my pal Kyle has started a project called Public Access TV Writing, where he walks you through the task of creating a pitch for a TV show. Big deal, I hear you say. Lots of people do that on the internet. But there's a twist, you see. He's doing that from the perspective of someone still learning and experimenting and documenting the experiences of his process along the way. You can watch in real time as he faces the same challenges and setbacks that you would and how he overcomes them. Plus, if you enjoy my sense of humor, first of all, I'm sorry, that sounds hard. And secondly, he's got pretty much the same one, so you'll find more of that there. No offense, Kyle. Please destroy his comment section with positivity. Crush my friend Kyle's testicles with affirmative comments. Thank you. Yeah, I got a haircut. I do that. Do you have a small project that has nothing left to lose? Feed it to us in exactly one email at thoughtslimeeditor@gmail.com with the word eyeballs somewhere in the subject line and pertinent details like your pertinent pronouns, and maybe you will be found here, long dead, used up, by the eyeball zone. Sure did make a video. Anyone who tells you I didn't make a video is fucking lying to your face. Why don't you hit the like button already about it? And subscribe for more of these videos. And also, I have a Patreon and t-shirts. So, like, what do you think is that enough calls to action? What do you need more? I don't know. I said some charity stuff. Go to the PCRF for MAP. What do you want from me? Do you want me to bleed?